Welcome to Caserta's Data Intelligence web series. In this series, we talk about what it takes to go from a good data and analytics leader to a great one. We'll share with you the tools and methodologies you need to build better, faster, and more robust, as well as strategies and frameworks to generate more revenue and grow your business. Featuring some very special guests and experts to inspire you and give you advice and direction on your data journey. And now, introducing your host, Caserta Data and Analytics Evangelist and VP Marketing, Remy Rosenbaum.
Hey, fellow data and analytics aficionados, and thank you for joining me today in an episode of Caserta's Data Intelligence web series. I'm your host, Remy Rosenbaum. And if you didn't already know, the purpose of this series is to educate you on the latest trends, tech, and inspire you with leading industry experts and their stories from the data and analytics trenches. It's to guide you on your data journey and give you actionable advice so you can improve yourself in your organization and become more data-driven. And today is something very special for you. This is the very first episode in a 6-part special master series that we're producing for you, all about operationalizing data governance. We have brought together the finest data talent to present on these topics and teach you how to do this in your organization. I'm going to let our first presenter, Joe Caserta, talk a little bit more about that. And speaking of our presenters, our first is Joe Caserta, who is our founding CEO. He's also a recognized public speaker, entrepreneur, technologist, and he's going to be speaking at MIT CDOIQ next week, delivering a keynote, which I'm going to send you more information about after the webinar. He's also a best-selling author who wrote the Data Warehouse ETL Toolkit, and it's become the standard for preparing for data and analytics. Joe is recognized as an authority on enterprise data analytics, and he continues to expand and innovate his role in the industry. And as soon as we are allowed to, Joe will also be speaking on stage throughout the United States and the world, with or without a mask on. We'll see how that goes. And after that, we have Gerard Bartolome, who is a solution architect at Caserta and senior engineer. He is focused on big data, data engineering, and analytics. He has deep experience working across multiple industries, restaurant, hospitality, retail, and media, to name a few. And he too has been on stage at AWS and given talks in front of hundreds of people, and he'll soon retake the stage after all this is done. A little bit of housekeeping, and then we're going to jump right into it. If you didn't already know about us, at Caserta, we transform good data analytics leaders like you into great ones so that you can build faster, grow your business, generate more revenue, and spend more time with your family. We deliver strategic assessments based on with actionable roadmaps, craft innovative designs and architectures, and perform advanced implementations with our relentlessly talented staff that leverage the latest technologies and proven frameworks and methodologies. Our teams are all led by data scientists and data engineers who all share a dedication for solving our clients' toughest data and analytics challenges fast. After today's presentation, please, I encourage you to talk to me with any questions you have about what you've learned today and how you can apply this to your organization. Our first conversations are always completely complimentary, and if we can work together, wonderful. And if we think that you should go somewhere else, we'll always give you neutral advice to point you in the right direction. After today's webinar, since you're already going to ask, I will definitely send you a recording to the email address you provided. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please ask them in the questions panel on the right. Joe, the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Remy. Let's see if I can present first step here.
The first step.
See me?
All right, looks good.
Great. So I will just remind everyone that I'm only going to speak for a few minutes and pass the baton over to Gerard. And I picked this picture of a brain because really what we're trying to do is translate data governance requirements to make them operational. And there's a few different things that we're going to talk about. One is, the people part. The other part is the process part. But the biggest challenge that we see, and we've been at this for a couple of decades, the biggest challenge is how do you actually execute the technologies to enforce the data governance policies? And for for a long time, we've been talking about data governance, with Caserta, and then, in the broader world for 20, 30 years. And I do a lot of public speaking, and every time I speak, I ask who's responsible for data governance. Lots of hands go up. Who feels like their environment, their enterprise is fully governed? 0 hands go up, 100% of the time. So, and the challenge is that come up with great policies, and then it's basically after that, it's essentially the honor system. And when what we're going to do over the next 6 sessions is talk bits and bytes about how do you actually execute a policy technically to avoid, bad actors from doing bad things. And also what that does is that enables the enterprise to grow bigger, to scale, to grow faster, and to enable, the ultimate, objective, which typically is to get to the paradigm where you're offering up data as a service. And without having operational data governance, that is an impossibility, regardless of what technologies you have, what cloud platform you have. You have to bake the data governance into your technical solutions for you to accomplish your goals. So that's really what we're going to focus on for the next 6 sessions. So what are the different aspects that we're going to talk about? When we talk about data in general, we talk about ML, machine learning, advanced analytics, data visualization, building data pipelines, building data stores on the cloud, architecting all of that data, engineering all of that data, building data lakes, doing AI, monetizing the data after you've done all those other things, and coming up with strategies for all of this. The piece of thread that goes through all of these things that enables it to actually be functional is governance. And without governance, just like any other society, without governance, it's really chaos, right? And that's why we have shadow ITs and, failures and penalties and regulatory breaches. And, what we're trying to do over the next 6 sessions is teach you how to protect yourselves from all of these things. And throughout these exercises, we're going to speak primarily assuming that you're on the cloud, but no particular cloud. We have consultants certified in Azure, AWS, GCP. Depending on who's speaking, may create examples on one or the other, but the concepts that we teach you are going to be applicable across all clouds. So just keep that in mind. And the other thing that we really want to focus on is not so much like how do you create a policy, right? There's plenty of consultants out there who can do that. There's internal CDOs that know how to do that. What we're going to talk about is how do you enforce those policies, right? How do you prevent them from happening? And then how do you know if they did happen? And that's really what we're going to try to focus on. Make sure that the entire enterprise, all of your regulators, and all of the stakeholders within the enterprise have secure, reliable, consistent, accurate, and timely information. And we're going to talk about what does it take to do that, and how do we get there, right? So some of it will be architectures. I don't know if we're going to get down to like code reviews, but some of the sessions might get fairly technical because it's just the best way to illustrate how to execute something. So you may see some pseudocode on the screens, not in this session, but maybe in the future sessions. So why do we care? As we are in the new millennium, and actually the only way to communicate nowadays is through data and through video, and no one is like in their office together anymore. So it's more important than ever that we know how to govern the information that we are sharing. And there, one of the reasons why we see data governance projects fail is because we lose sight of the entire spectrum of governance. The entire spectrum of governance starts with corporate governance, right? There's usually an executive board that oversees the entire enterprise. And then within that enterprise, there's senior leaders, executive leaders, vice presidents, managers, directors, and everyone is accountable for making sure that the organization runs right. There's legal counsel, there's regulatory experts, and from a ethics perspective and corporate objectives perspective, the corporate governance typically works, otherwise you go out of business. Why I think data governance fails over time is because it generally is done in isolation as a project. Just like corporate governance, it's never finished. You are always governing, always finding new things to govern, and it can't work without IT governance, and they also can't work without being tightly coupled to corporate governance. And if it's run as a separate project by itself, it's going to fail. It needs to have all of the different spectrums involved: corporate governance, IT governance, and data governance, in order for you to call your enterprise completely governed. And you cannot call your company completely governed if you don't have all of these types of governance. Interestingly, in the past 6 months, well, it's August already, pandemic is making my time frame off, but in 2020, before 2020, typically our buyer at Caserta was typically a CIO. We are getting risk managers more and more often. 2020 has really been the year of ERM for us, because enterprise risk really cannot be managed without having a thorough data governance mechanism, right? Not only a policy, but a mechanism. So the big red thing on the bottom says management and assurance processes. So one of the key things we're going to teach you in these sessions is not only how to do it, but most importantly, how to automate it. Data governance should be a lights out operation that just runs, where we don't have to think about it. So when we talk about governance, I just want to be very clear exactly what we're talking about. It's kind of amorphous, right? It's most ambiguous word in the industry, I think. So when we talk about governance over these sessions, we're very specifically talking about the organization of your data organization, helping you figure out what a data organization should look like within your ecosystem. Metadata management, generating metadata, collecting metadata, sharing metadata, what types of metadata, privacy and security, we're going to cover that today, and data quality and monitoring, specifically how to build dynamic data quality ecosystem within your data platform. Business process integration, that is basically data as a service, so that you can share your data and make data the core of all of your applications, and also have it run your business outside of your enterprise. And how do you do that? How do you establish service level agreements? All of that we're going to help you figure out. Master data management. When you don't have control over all of your data, when it's coming from the outside world, how could you possibly master it? We're going to talk about some of the modern MDM challenges that we run into all the time, and some of our pretty advanced, sophisticated techniques that we are using starting, probably within the last 18 months to 24 months. And then finally, information lifecycle management. How do you know when to purge data? How do you make that lights out operation? If you need to store it, archive it, put it offline, how does all of that work? And we'll come up with a few different techniques depending on the platform you're on. And the thread across all of these, in every one of these sessions, we're going to talk a little bit about the people that are involved, the processes that are involved, and the technologies that are involved. And I am looking forward to it. And I will say one more time that if you have any questions along the way, even if it's not based on today's session on any of these topics, feel free to ask questions in the chat in this session, because we are currently still building a lot of these future sessions. And if we see a theme in these questions that you're asking, we will modify our future sessions to answer your questions and address your questions. So we are going to talk about data lakes, data integration, data science, ephemeral data science workspaces, the promotion policy and the promotion mechanism for moving data from a data science laboratory into a data lake and ultimately graduating it to a data warehouse, making it available to share with other applications and by end users. We will talk about exactly the concept of just enough governance. One of the failures that we see over and over again with our clients is trying to fully govern every component of the data pyramid, which is just not possible, right? So we need to know what's achievable and how to achieve it, and we're going to cover that. These are the specific sessions that we're going to have and the dates of where we're going to show them. They will be recorded and they will be available after these dates, but we encourage you to have the live session so that you can take advantage of the Q&A sessions. So just to be clear, data access, privacy, and sovereignty is today. Establishing a data organization is August 27th. That is going to be hosted by Doug Laney, so I strongly encourage you to come. For those of you who don't know Doug Laney, former Gartner consultant, best-selling author of Infonomics, the book on how to monetize data. Generating, harnessing, and sharing metadata, September 24th. Ensuring data quality, modern data ecosystem. A lot of the concepts that I wrote in the Data Warehouse CTL Toolkit 15 years ago have been modernized, and this session on October 8th is going to show how do we do it today with modern technologies. Automating data governance and IT governance. When we are allowing users to have self-service analytics, they are building their own models, they are building their own code. How do you take that when you want to graduate it to production and operationalize it? Not only does the data have to go through a data governance lifecycle, but the code of the models and the code of the queries and the code that's generating the insights also needs to be governed and go through a governance process. So on October 22nd, we'll show you exactly how to do that. Last one on November 5th is the MDM solution. And with that, if you want to register, you can go to Caserta.com and find it in the How to Operationalize Data Governance page, or you can just search it in our website as well. It is listed in our events section also, and or if you don't want to do any of those things, just go to datagovernance@Caserta.com and we will send you a link to exactly where you need to go to sign up for the sessions that you want. So with that, I will pass the presentation back to Remy.
Thanks, Joe. Yes, we encourage you all to attend future presentations. One thing to note, because you're here today, you're actually automatically registered to all of our future presentations. So no need to re-register. You will get an email reminder before the event and how you can connect to it. So fill out a form once and you're good for the whole series. Gerard, now over to you.
Thanks, Remy. Thanks, Joe. Hey, all. Welcome to the 6-part series of data governance. My name is Gerard Bartolome. I am a solutions architect for Caserta. So the topic that I have today, specifically within the series, is basically on the thing that Joe basically stated, which is the sovereignty, the privacy, and security and access of data. Which are 3 very key things and important things of data governance. A little bit of my background. I have a software engineering background, so a lot of what I do is specifically kind of on the software engineering end, specifically more on the data side and distributed computing. It basically amalgamated into transactional systems to data warehouses to object stores. I have a very open source framework of mentality of how to tackle data problems, especially in the ever evolving data world. Things do change quite a bit and quite often, so you always have to have an open mind, especially when you're trying to process, gigabytes, terabytes, and petabytes of data. So let's get to the presentation. So data governance. I think Joe touched on this a little bit with his kind of slide on the paradigms of governance. So within this paradigm, you have multiple segments of governance that you need to be able to be aware of, you need to be able to take care of, and you need to be able to be cognizant about, right? Because we all know data can be an asset or liability depending on how well it's managed. Some key elements of data governance strategy are listed within the slide. A lot of it is basically high level, and we can talk about these things in a much more deeper manner, offline. That's what we're here for. This is more of a high level, but with enough, content to be able to understand the flow of, when you have questions. So some of the key elements of data governance and strategy would be, things that are well defined within processes, policies, standards, and roles. So what I mean about this, right, when Joe mentioned that, this ecosystem should not just be a data requirement, it should be a company requirement. A lot of the times when these isolated aspects of data governance need to happen, everybody has to be involved, because in the end of the day, if you come from a data-driven mentality, you have to have an enablement of having sound processes and procedures for the company that trickles down to your data governance and data teams. And that leads into the stakeholder ownership and accountability. Ownership and accountability I'll talk about quite a bit within this presentation, because it is important when you're trying to create standardization and centralization of your data. And the common understanding of definitions, right? So everybody has to speak the language. When you're talking about things like queries or how a user is created or basically referenced, it should be the same centralized definition within the whole ecosystem of the company. You can see that some of the stuff that I'll be focusing on today is going to be on the sovereignty, access, compliance, and security. Those three things are very important in the governance aspect of things, as when you take data in and putting data out, you need to be able to key on those three things. When we talk about governance, right, we always want to think about it in production. The aspect of the whole data governance framework is having trust in the data, being able to know and realize that when you're using this data, it's vetted and it's trustable. The three key factors within production, especially within the governance world, is the sovereignty part, the access and security, and also the privacy. Domain accountability, when I talk about this in production, it is basically having aspects of the clarity of ownership, the accuracy of the data, and timely, transparent communication between a centralized team and company to be able to be thoughtful about some of the things that you use your data for. And a lot of that becomes an accountability aspect, not just from the data team, but also from the product managers, the stakeholders, the business users, all the way to the user of it from a service layer. So the typical day of when we talk about data, and especially kind of on, when you're looking at this from a pipeline sense of how data gets in from source all the way to target, this is what a typical day looks like, right? So when you are a business user, if you're a stakeholder and you want to see, your lifetime value report, or if you want to see your, your forecast or year-over-year metrics, it usually goes through this process or a pseudo process like this, right? So it's fairly simple. It's a left to right process, but there's so many different aspects of data governance that come in within building this pipeline, right? So, some of the parts that come in, and we're going to specifically talk about data lakes, is the storage part, right? So you're getting data from your many disparate data sources, and you're thinking about and you're thoughtfully trying to say, well, what am I going to collect? We want the rawest possible data, but we also want to be able to be cognizant and compliant with laws and aspects of governance. So you get all this data, you move it into an object store, which would be a data lake. You get it in, you basically build rules, right? So your rules are where a lot of your parts of your privacy and cataloging rules of governance would work. A lot of that would be a mixture of public, legal, and also security policies that you get in while you're cleansing. Once you cleanse the data in, you're basically thinking about, access pattern rules. And these rules are basically going to be how users are going to be able to interact with data, how things are going to be able to interact with data, how services will be able to interact with data. And again, a lot of these things do touch the access, sovereignty, and privacy patterns, because within each iteration of this step, you're always cognizant of privacy, where this data is coming from, and also how is this data going to be used. Within the fifth level, you have the aspect of your basically your stakeholders, right? So when you get to that aspect of access, you want to be able to have the data clean, prepped, cataloged, secured, and have that trustable asset to be able to say, you know what, this is something that we can present out to the public, and this is something that we can present out to our internal and external stakeholders. That's vetted out, with having the policy set when you're already kind of in that presentation layer. So we get into the data sovereignty side, right? So with data sovereignty, it's a fancy word of saying locality. So each company or each aspect of a B2C or a digital company will have policies that need to be able to be cognizant about the collection and the residency of where their data is, right? So a lot of the times when data is collected, say in Europe or in America, you're going to have quite a bit of different privacy policies that you need to be able to be compliant with, and you need to be able to adapt to. And a lot of that, isn't necessarily a one-all end-all framework, but the data governance policies that from a high level will give you that direction to be able to basically give you that North Star to know where that the sweet spot is of how to manage this locality. With that, sovereignty has a lot to do with ownership, right? So within the locality aspect of your data, you need to have ownership of these processes. And the way you kind of break that down is within these 4 bullet points or 5 bullet points. Stewards, your data stewards are basically they're the liaisons, right? So they're the liaisons to your data teams, to your stakeholders, to your product managers, to your engineers. They should be the pseudo subject matter experts of the data that's basically being collected and being used. Again, stewards are very important because they are the ones that give the centralized dialogue to the business, right? They give the aspect of being able to talk data with the engineers and also talk data with the stakeholders who might not be that technical. So they're a very key important part of being able to know and know locality. Advocates are your buy-ins, right? They're your high-level stakeholders who are your C-levels, your senior directors, the people that really believe in data and having a data-driven framework. Those are the ones that give you the ability to be able to govern these models. And legal is very important, as security is everywhere. You have to be able to know how to adapt to these policies because they are ever changing, and you have to be able to know how to basically create procedures that suffices these legal policies. Last is security. All these are tied together because security is basically baked on top of most of these things. But it is the aspect of being able to be cognizant about, if you're collecting data in France, are you compliant with their security measures? If you're collecting data in North Dakota, are you compliant with their security measures? So security and locality are very synonymous to one another. And all this is basically all tied again together. They're all synergistic and they're linked together to basically create a more secured product to be able to present your data in a governed way. And it gives you a lot of transparency too. And I think being able to have that transparency, especially with ownership, gives you that empowerment as a company to be able to use this data well. And some examples of locality within the sovereignty model, right? So the big one I think that most people know here is GDPR, right? So GDPR is basically the European policy and standards to be able to really present, use, store, and limit movement of data. A lot of the times when you create these policies, the reason why I put these bullet points up is you want to be able to be very user-centric about creating these policies, because in the end of the day, you're really protecting your user. A lot of the times when you create these policies for privacy, your end goal is to protect your user as much as you can, right? So you have to have that empathy from a user-centric frame of mind that when you're governing these things, you're not just governing this for the company, but you're governing this for your subscribers or for your users or for the people that actually use your service. And then a lot of the times, when you think about how do you make a user-centric model, especially within governance, you want to think about how the user is able to basically ask for this data, right? So the right to access, to be able to rectify the data, to be able to erase their data, to get a lot of the restriction and the portability of being able to request their data or having it just deleted. And then the right to basically say, no, I don't want our data or my data to be collected. A lot of the times that's how you succeed in kind of trickling down your direction and governance is when you think about it from a user frame point. So that's the GDPR kind of locality model. We then go a little bit more granular towards basically a state or even a more local aspect of model, which is CCPA. A lot of the California Consumer Privacy Act rules were basically based on a lot of the experiences of GDPR, right? It's basically the same framework and the same pattern where you're taking data that you have within your ecosystem and you're saying, hey, you know what? I have this private data. How can we abide by the locality of rules within the California data policy sets? And this is probably going to be adapted. I'm probably going to assume within all 50 states. I think it is a great aspect of visibility and transparency to be able to have a user have the right to access their data, especially when nowadays a lot of companies collect massive amounts of user data without users not really knowing it. And I think that's where the aspect of adaptability, especially kind of with this model, when it was just recently introduced to be compliant in Jan 1st this year, there are a lot of companies out there that really did kind of bottleneck in the process for trying to really be compliant because the rules were ever changing. And that's where I talk about the adaptability of having the aspect of governance not to be just a static model, but to be able to work around models that are ever changing, like the CCPA rules, right? They're probably going to change more within the next couple of years, and the adaptation of your code base, the adaptation of your workflow, and the adaptation of how you collect this data will have to align basically and be compliant with the full aspect of CCPA. So once you get to the aspect of sovereignty, and once you know where the locality of your data is, and how to treat those procedures, you basically go through the privacy and security models, right? So this is something that I implemented of CCPA last year to be compliant for the company that I used to work for. So securing data, there's there's two big steps of doing it: anonymization and obfuscation. So a lot of that comes from the core of having a catalog of metadata, of rules, of lineage, of seeing and knowing where your data is coming from to be able to recognize what your PII or PCI information lives within your ecosystem, right? So when you think about privacy and security, you're thinking about, well, if I have to adapt to the laws of anonymization, which is within CCPA or an obfuscation, how do I start? Where do I go, right? Usually the first step to do this is when you're creating pipelines, and this is where the synergy comes from, is you get a requirement from a stakeholder, you do discovery, basically you get all the things that you need to be collected, and then you gather metadata of that collection to be able to give you insight on what you're getting, right? So if you're getting data that's all HIPAA compliant, then you need to be able to know that certain keys from this HIPAA data set is PII, and there has to be a way for you to be able to mask or obfuscate it. And that's where this identification process flow usually it's an example of how you can anonymize data sets from specifically within a data lake or an object store. The way that happens is most of the times, you have a referential aspect of a staging place where you can collect data and can reference your data catalog. And basically from there is a point where you're able to mask that data set in order for it to become an actual productionalized data collection within your production data buckets or data lake. So a lot of the times when you do anonymization, you're basically not necessarily changing the format of the data. You're basically just representing or translating it with excluding the PII. So the raw aspect of the immutable stateless object is still pristine. The only difference is you're basically taking away data that can indemnify you. And that's the same pattern with obfuscation, right? So you can't just think about this from a data lake standpoint where your data has PII out when you're serving this data, and you need to know that this data has to be, within certain regulations. You have to be able to have in-transit techniques to be able to scramble sensitive data or mask sensitive data to be able to present, in a compliant way. And all this really comes from knowledge of having a robust data catalog. And that's something that a lot of businesses kind of forget when they're starting to collect a lot of data. They forget how to tag and find aspects of what this data is about. And a lot of it is very important, especially when something goes wrong or something errors out. You need to be able to map the lineage of having your end data to be able to know how it got to that point. And a lot of that will be coming from the catalog. So when we talked about, the obfuscation and anonymization of data, we need to also think about encryption, right? Encryption is something that is also very it's a synonymous thing to within data lakes, as these things should be the first things you think about when you're collecting data. A lot of the encryption capabilities out there, specifically in the cloud-based systems like AWS, Azure, and GCP, have baked in forms of encryption. And I think that's one of the advantages of having the ability to be in a managed service like the cloud is, you don't necessarily have to kind of, dig down and say, what kind of encryption do I need? You're already offered several different options that are pretty legit within, the security framework that we have today within the digital community. And some of that are, when you think about encryption, you have to think about encryption in two spots, right? So one's at rest and one's in motion or in transit. A lot of the times when you're collecting your data in your data lake, you have to already have an automatic set rule to know that, hey, listen, this data is basically going to be private. The only way this data is going to be able to be accessed is within access patterns that we as a business or a service give the data to get basically approval of. And we'll talk about that a little bit more within the next slides. So when you're collecting all this data, you always have to be cognizant and thoughtful that when you're collecting, that you're also encrypting, right? So when you're collecting it from, a highly private source, you have to be able to know that your in-transit mechanism is encrypted, and also when it lands to your object store that it's encrypted. And a lot of the times, within these cloud platforms, you have two aspects of being able to maneuver within that encryption. You have the big model, which is, the service model of encryption that the cloud platform has, and you also have these keys or KMS, these management services that are able to assign keys to specifically, to a service or to your services to be able to request access and request out for your data. A lot of the times when you're doing these encryptions, especially when you're collecting and also serving, it encrypts. The good part is these KMS patterns encrypt when it's replicated across regions, right? So it's not just your encryption is in one place. Every time your data is being accessed in or out, it's basically encrypted based off of those keys. Now you have, as a company, have an option to be able to either manage your own keys and make it static, or have the cloud provider to be able to manage it for you. One of the good advantages of having a KMS key managed by a cloud platform is the rotation aspect of it, right? It gives you that extra layer of security to be able to know that, hey, I have a static key that company A manages. It hasn't been changed in 5 years. It might be a liability. A lot of the times, the good part about these cloud platforms is you're able to rotate these keys, that it cascades to your services that these keys are able to access. For the in-transit motion, right, for transient rules, you have basic things that I think that are also kind of baked into the cloud platforms, like TLS and SSL protocols that enable endpoints. Whenever you talk, to either make a GET request or put request, you have, your baked in HTTPS technology protocols, your certs to be able to know that when your data is in transit, it's basically being scrambled, and you need a specificity to be able to access the deserialized version of it. So when we talk about the aspects of privacy and encryption and anonymization and obfuscation, we also have to be cognizant about infrastructure, right? So infrastructure is a big thing, especially if you're trying to separate your services within segregation, especially the ones that are private and the ones that are public. So when you think about it, from a cloud perspective, and this is a cloud diagram, these icons can align to Azure, GCP, and AWS. You think about privacy within subnets, right? So subnets are basically just assigned IPs that are basically given to your services. It's dependent on the access gateways that basically make these IPs private. You can see within this architecture and this framework, you have two partitions of services, right? You have your data services that live in your private subnets, and you have your public services, which are basically your load balancers, your APIs, your Lambda invocations. They're the ones that will live on basically the public services to be able to talk to your private services. The way these are managed within the infrastructure side is within gateways, like I said. So private subnets are usually managed by a NAT gateway. So the main purpose of that is basically something that says, hey, you know what? I'm a private service that needs to be able to talk out, but I'm a public service that can't talk back in. So you only have an egress, which is be able to talk out. The internet gateway, which is the public side, has the bidirectional aspect of being able to talk in and being able to talk out. And that's how most frameworks within the cloud are basically partitioned. You have all your private services that are handling a lot of the data, your databases, your infrastructure applications that have to be able to happen in the back end, while your front end is basically just a pretty lightweight client that basically interacts with your private services. You can see the data lake, and a lot of best practices is usually when you're doing things within the cloud is not to have any of your data, public, because the cloud in general is a public platform. So if you can, even isolate or abstract your data to even more, in a private manner, you're able to not be exposed, especially, nowadays there's hacks and whatnot that's able to get through these public buckets, and be able to get into the private side. Good rule of thumb is just make all your data private and have programmatic ways to be able to access it. Another aspect of infrastructure that's great within the cloud platforms is you can do end-to-end regional peering. So when you do endpoint peering, what that does is you basically you're using the network of the cloud provider. So you're not hopping over the internet to be able to talk to your services when something like you need an Apache Spark cluster to be able to talk to your recommendation engine outside. You could peer those two internally within the cloud to be able to use a lot of the cloud infrastructure in their network, to be able to skip the aspect of privacy within the public side. And it's also great because your latency is a lot less when you're going through the internal infrastructure and network of the cloud provider. So the last part of the talk is the data access part, right? So you have the sovereignty, the security, and the privacy. Now it's, well, how do I access data, right? So how do I present data? How do I create data in a way where the anonymized data can be outputted to, a recommendation engine, a BI tool, a data science model? And some of the user access patterns that are quite popular out there from the cloud perspective are listed here. IAM, your identity access management, is basically it's your gateway. It's basically it's the first aspect of you being able assigned a policy or a role. When you go into these cloud platforms, or even on-prem, you're assigned, a group or a role or a high-level, utility job to be able to start treading through the services. So IAM is kind of the initial gateway for a user or a service to be able to access, the trickle-down aspect of the data. Once you get there, if you need a lot more access, say you're a data scientist and you need to do models on a VM, or you're a service that needs to be able to access a key store in a private subnet, you build gateway proxies, right? So gateway proxies could be built for users, and users are synonymous between services and humans, to be able to have an entry point to a service to be able to access the data within the data lake. So when you proxy in, you're basically assigned, again, a key or a tokenized, hash aspect, which is called a PEM, to be able to tunnel in through this proxy. A lot of the times, this proxy is either called a jump box or a bastion, where it is the liaison between the user and the service, or a whole slew of services to be able to basically authenticate and say, you know what, John Doe is this user, I have their key pair, it's going to go through this proxy within this tunnel, and that's going to be able to access, a Spark cluster, a Hadoop cluster, a key store to be able to do their job. A lot of that also entails of, your access control list. When within the IM, you can create a lot more finite object level of fine-grained access based off of your control list within your service, right? So if you're, say, a marketing intern and you need access to campaign emails for a marketing blast, and you need to be able to access that within a specificity part of a data lake, that ACL will give you that object-grained, fine-grained access to be able to really put a lot of direction within how the privacy of your data can be accessed. And within that, it gives you that whole ecosystem of being able to know that when you're accessing these data points as a stakeholder, you're not liable because you don't have access to everything. You can basically sleep sound because you have access to what you need. And the great part about this is the autonomy part is, if you need more access as a service or as a user, a lot of the times it's a pretty quick, build to be able to build very, very, fine-grained access and policies to be able to present and deploy back to the user to be able to do their work. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Gerard. That was excellent. I think we've all learned a lot there. And thank you for this presentation. We have time for a couple of questions. So let's jump into it really quickly. The first is a business question that we got. So I guess, Joe, you could take this one. Why are you guys giving away all this secret sauce? Is this not what you guys do? Joe, take it away.
Yeah, it would
Good
seem
question.
It would seem like it's counterintuitive, but when I originally wrote the Data Warehouse ETL Toolkit, the reason I did it is because we like, as a company, we like to create, unique solutions, right? And after you create the foundation of the unique solution, that part of it starts to become uninteresting. And so as we evolve, new things start to become the foundation, and the foundation is getting broader and broader. Back when I wrote the ETL toolkit, just preparing data started to become mundane for me. So I was like, one of the key things to remember is that when you're, even like internally, not even as a consultant, but when you're trying to get approval for a data project, for us, like our biggest competitor are not other consulting firms. Our biggest competitor is previously failed attempts at building a data solution, right? The more success there is out there, the better that is for our business. So if we can help you build the building blocks and we can come in and build it, then you get credibility for having unique data solutions. That's exciting for us. So we want to have lots of success, whether we do it or not. It's better for us.
You know what that reminds me of, Joe? Something by Gartner, they once talked about the high cost of doing nothing. These internal projects that you try to get it off the ground running, and then you do nothing. And I think you even mentioned one of your talks. How do you calculate not using data governance? How do you calculate those missed opportunities? And we can help people with that. And how do you measure and see how you can monetize that and really put a dollar figure on that?
Moving to the cloud, the biggest reason why it's not so embraced, like it's becoming pretty embraced nowadays, but the reason why it's been a little bit slow going is because people are afraid that they won't be able to govern it. So what we're trying to do is just remove, stop being paralyzed. Just, we'll tell you how to do it and just move forward. And the other thing also is what we're telling you over this series is fairly genericized because we want it to be appropriate for a broad audience. When you go to implement it yourself, you may need specialists who know how to do very unique, specific approaches and techniques, and then you may call us. So
all right.
Thanks,
Joe.
Sure.
That's right. So I'll ask a technical question. this gentleman asks, and Gerard, I'll throw this to you. Can you mention a few options, perhaps tools or tech, to control the access to the data at the row or column level? For example, if I'd only want to grant users access to records by US state equals FL.
Is this a specificity of a database or a data store? Because there are, you can try to have a generic answer, especially on row level security and column level security, but it's really dependent on the type of data store that you're using. So to answer your question on a generic level, yes. We can definitely, that is a possible thing to do. It really is dependent on where you're giving security, because you can definitely do this on a database level or a key store level, or you can do this from an IAM level. So it is really pick your poison.
I asked for a follow-up, so if you did hear that answer and you'd like to follow up, please respond to me and we'll get you a better answer. And our next question is more of a people and processes question. Oh, go for it, Joe, sorry.
Because we only have 2-3 minutes, 4 minutes maybe. We won't get into details, but I think with relational databases, MPPs, objects, even columnar stores, it's pretty. You could just Google it. Like it's you're not splitting atoms. The challenge is when it's an object data store, right? When it's an object data store, things are typically done at the data set level. But we do have techniques where you can apply user access security at the row level, and we'd be happy to talk about it. It's more than a 30-second conversation.
To our excellent presenters, thank you. I'm excited for the rest of the episodes in this series. And Gerard, thank you for teaching us about security and how to protect our assets in the cloud. Thank you, everyone.